فجونا مقرع دو كي تعمينا وفرسو فوريشويو كي بندمينا دولو مودانو دسيك توناتسيم موشوتوسو مبث سفروت سانت إغناطيوس مورغناطيوس اتكتيو مالفونو سيباستيان بروك الغلبة من فرجوني لاتيو نخرويو هاويلي حمشيشني بحبو حقلو تعبو وليوثو با هوغوي سريويد مترجم لك ثوي غلبة ومولفلي يولوفي غلبة دما قملي وبريلي خلق لي انترسي وحبوبو لهوغوي سريويد سي غلبة نوشي معربوي يالي فيركي كود على شونو كثبونويو بس كومر لاتنو غلبة اوخد فنيحوي عند قوضانا مشغنو لاشن توخك مشغولين بولي شونو انجليشويو ملفونو سيباستيان بشاينو يثات لسيريا تي في
شانو شلومو لكوخون شبوكلي دمال بلوشونو ديال انجليشويو
انجليشويو شبقين عن لوخ امريث بلعزو سوريت وروي امريث يطير ثنيحويو يثاو this conference is organized to honor you. First of all, you have been 80 years, and but most of all because your 5 decades contribution, lifelong contribution to Syriac studies. How do you feel about it?
Well, it's been a fantastic conference. I've met again so many friends from many different countries and met new people, especially younger people who are studying it. And what is very good, there are several people from the Syriac community, and this is terribly important for the future of the community, to have young people interested in their heritage. And this is why I wrote with More Julius Cicek the project on the Hidden Pearl. It was his idea, but I did the writing with the help of various colleagues, including Witold Witkowski from Sweden. And I hope that is a helpful volume. It was meant for all the Syriac communities, and it's only in the 3rd volume that the 1 or 2 chapters just for the Syrian Orthodox. But what I say before that is everyone's heritage. So I hope it's a helpful volume.
You have also translated many of our precious literatures like Morafrem and others, and made them available to the broader audience.
Yes, I think it's very important to make available the wonderful heritage of Syriac literature to the modern world, not just the Syriac communities, but also to other people as well, because these are texts which speak to, or can speak to, the modern world in ways that many other texts can't, many other texts from the ancient world can't. And for me, there are 3 writers who are very important from this point of view. More Ephraim, who's a fantastic poet, but he's also someone who provides an understanding of the relationship between the earthly world, the material world, and the immaterial world, the heavenly divine world, in a way that actually makes sense. It makes sense to me, and has a number of remarkable links with some developments in, I think it's called particle or subparticle physics. I know nothing about that, but when I was writing The Luminous Eye, which tried to explain St. Ephraim's worldview, I happened to read a work called The Tao of Physics by someone who was a professional scientist, and he was explaining these recent developments in this particular branch of physics, and what he was saying, and he actually used many Oriental religions as analogies to what these modern developments were. What he didn't do was use Syriac as an analogy, or Ephraim as an analogy, but that was because he didn't know about Ephraim. And Ephraim would have been just as good an example for him. So Ephraim, rightly understood, and you have to read his genuine poems, not the many poems attributed to him, which are not such high quality. And then one discovers this wonderful way of understanding where one is in the created world.
Do you think he has inherited, Morafrem has inherited it from his ancestors before the Christ? For example, the Assyrians in Haran, and before them, the Assyrian Empire and the great scholars they produced?
It's very difficult to say. Certainly there's a continuity between ancient Mesopotamian literature and the Syriac literature in genres. The most obvious one is in the dialogue poetry, where you have two disputants arguing who is most helpful to humanity. And we have poems in Akkadian, Sumerian, and then later on in Jewish Aramaic, in Middle Persian, but it's especially in Syriac that you have this genre developed in a very creative way, adapted to Christianity, but also with some of the ancient, as it were, combatants. You have wheat and gold and things like that. And for me, discovering this was very exciting, and I wrote an article quite a long time ago now entitled From Sumer to Syriac about this poetry. So it's the one really clear example of continuity, but you can find continuity in other respects too, in some of the phraseology. Ephraim uses the term medicine of life. Well, that is Akkadian sambalati. It's exactly the same meaning. Ephraim, of course, adapts it to a Christian context, but the ancient Mesopotamian context was not unlike it. So one can find a lot of things. And another interesting thing is my colleague in England, Geoffrey Khan, who's a specialist on modern Aramaic dialects. He has found elements in some of the modern Aramaic dialects which have their ancestry in ancient Mesopotamia and Akkadian, which must come ultimately directly and not via classical Syriac. So there are many different, as it were, threads from ancient Mesopotamia to the modern dialects, and as well as to Xobonoyo.
Okay, that was about Morafrem, but you have two more scholars that you would like to or you appreciate.
Yes. One is another poet, and that is Mo Jakub Dasaruk, Jakub Malfono, and his wonderful verse homilies. If you want to get an understanding of biblical passages that seem difficult, go to Mo Jakub, and he will tell you, he will provide a very creative way of reading them. He's very imaginative, and I find him a wonderful exegete of the biblical text. And I hope people will use him in a way that he deserves. And then the third person is a monk from the Church of the East, Isaac de Ninwe, and he in fact came from Beit Katroi, and
that is today's Qatar.
Gulf. That's today's Qatar. And then he became Bishop of Ninwe for a short period. We don't know why he left it, but he left it for the mountains of, it seems to be West Iran. Somewhere.
Maybe he missed the literature and the sanctuary life.
I think his flock were too troublesome. I don't know. Anyhow, we don't know. But towards the end of his life, probably, he put together a number of monastic discourses, and he is really a fantastic psychologist of the understanding of the human psyche. And his writings, unlike quite a lot of ancient monastic writings, I think speak to today, to not just the monks, but also to lay people as well. And an indication of how his teaching, if you like to call it that, has seemed important to many people over the ages is that he was translated into Greek in Palestine in round about 800, so that's about 150 years after his death. And from Greek got into Latin, and then into Slavonic languages, and into Russian, and then in the present century, no, even in in the 20th century, even got into Japanese. So he's someone who people want to read. They do translate him. And I had the good fortune of discovering another collection of his homilies in a manuscript in Oxford, which had been sitting there since 1895 or something. It had come to Oxford, been sold to the Bodleian Library, the University Library, by someone from the Orkney region. And so this was a fantastic discovery. Quite by chance, I was doing something else and had got bored, so I ordered this unknown manuscript up out of pure curiosity, and there it was. This new, lost, well, it had been known to have existed, and one scholar in the early 20th century had actually seen the manuscript, but he'd seen it in the Middle East. And here it was sitting on my doorstep in Oxford. So that was a wonderful excitement. And I've translated quite a lot of it, not the whole, because someone else is editing part of it. And my translation has been used as a basis for Italian, French, Romanian. There's a Russian translation to Arabic. Clearly people still want to read him. Wow. And that pleases me, of course.
If we move on to modern time, yes. What contacts did you have with the Assyrian community? When I say Assyrian, I mean all the churches yes. within this nation, not only yes. the Syrian Orthodox. Yes. What contacts did you have had with our community in Sweden or so?
Yes, well, before having contact in Sweden, which I suppose is in the last few decades, I've had a lot of contacts. I suppose my earliest contacts were with the Assyrian community in London, and because the Church of the East had had a church in London for quite a long time. And quite often at that point, I knew the priest quite well, or got to know him, and he invited me to give talks. And he subsequently died, and a new priest came, and I did get to know him, but he was less interested in having my two academic talks, probably. And I've had a lot of contact. Well, I traveled to the Middle East a few times, Lebanon, Syria, Eastern Turkey, and in fact, on our honeymoon in 1966, my wife and I traveled to Tor Abdin.
Mor Gabriel?
Yes, to Mor Gabriel, and I got to know the Malfono at Mor Gabriel quite well, and
Malfono Isa Garisimen.
That's right, yeah. And his wife Elishba, and we arranged for them to come to Oxford for an English language course because they wanted to do that. So they stayed with us in Oxford for several months, I think it was. I forget how long. That was a good long in the early mid-70s, I think, because we moved to Oxford in 74. And I've continued, although I haven't seen Isa very much, I think the last time I saw him was at Mar Julius Zizek's funeral. But I may have seen him once since then. But it's only on rare occasions that I've seen him since. But I believe he's coming to Muafra Monastery this autumn, and I shall come to see him.
They're going to make a conference to honor him.
Yes, that's very good. He certainly deserves this, and he is the Malfono Malfoni. I'm not that. I'm a Malfono Zoro.
Humble. We are very humble. Makicho.
No, I think that I really mean it. Isa has trained a whole generation of new Malfoni, and he's done a fantastic task. Yeah.
Here in Södertälje and Sweden, your contacts, did you have any contacts that enrich your life or something? You mentioned something during your lecture?
Yes, I've been to Sweden, I think it's 2 or 3 times. This is the 3rd time or 4th time, I can't remember. And the last time was a very important occasion for me because I was the external examiner for someone for a thesis, a doctorate at Uppsala University. Now, one of the things that had always seemed to be very important for the community is that they should have in each generation a few scholars who knew Sobernoyo well, who knew the literature well, and who could, as it were, carry on the academic tradition of the language in Western Europe. And this was a thesis which, in fact, combined both a very good knowledge of Syriac, but also a very good knowledge of Greek. It was on philosophical texts of the 5th and 6th century, and I was so pleased that Sami Aydin, this man, had got his doctorate, and it was wonderful for me to actually be involved in this very good occasion. And there's certainly many people who've now got doctorates in other subjects, but for me it was especially important to have people who have a good academic training in Sobernoyo, and especially the literature and history. And so I was extremely pleased.
Well, I admire your energy. You are 80, but you're still traveling around and teaching and working and translating. Where do you got this energy from?
I don't actually know. I have a wonderful wife who puts up with be doing all sorts of things that when I should be washing up, or actually I do the washing up at home, but I don't do the ironing and I don't do the cleaning. So she puts up with many things. And she's also an academic. She works in archaeology. This is in very early Greek archaeology, the Mycenaean Minoan period. But so my interests are 2 millennia later than hers, so I'm very decadent.
As to, you mentioned something, the Greeks here and archaeology. I was thinking about the contribution our church fathers and scholars made to the Arab literature by translating the Greek literature, for example.
Yes, the Syriac contribution to Arabic philosophy is it's hidden away, but it's extremely important. Under the early Abbasids, there was this huge movement commissioned by the Abbasid caliphs, and they wanted, as it were, all Greek secular knowledge, philosophy, medicine, science, available in Arabic. And at first there was no tradition of translating direct from Greek into Arabic, so they got people from the Syriac, different Syriac churches to do the work, and quite often it was easier to translate first into Syriac and then into Arabic. And even the great translator Hunayn, he used that method quite often. That's right. So this is a century after it had all begun. But by that time, people could translate very well directly into Arabic. So for a very short period, but if these Syriac translators had not been around, the whole world would be very different. And what is
so the Enlightenment period and the would not be the same. And
that's right.
The Renaissance would not be to come to Europe, they say.
Yes. What is important to remember is that this made available to Islamic philosophy of the 11th, 12th, 13th century the means of speaking on a level, of same philosophical level with the Western Latin world, because they were also heirs of the Greek philosophical tradition, but translated into Latin, whereas they had it through Syriac into Arabic. And so that's why the medieval Arabic, or a certain number of the medieval Arabic philosophical texts got into Latin in Spain in the 12th, 13th century, and had an enormous influence on Western intellectual history. So in this long chain, the Syriac element is a key element, even though it was only a key element for a very short period.
Okay, did I forget something? Do you want to add a few words before we finish?
What do I want to add? I think my message to you all is be proud of the Syriac tradition and of its literature, its artistic heritage, which is very scattered. You find illuminated manuscripts with pictures, but there aren't so many. But you do have wall paintings in medieval period, and they're being discovered every now and then, new ones. And music, this is very important, because music was never written down. It's an oral tradition, but it's been transmitted wonderfully over the centuries, and it's very important to keep that up and maybe adapt sometimes to new approaches, but don't forget the traditional music, because that is something very precious. And it's something that all cultures from both Middle East and also from Eastern Europe, the wonderful musical traditions, and they're always in danger of being overwhelmed by being drowned
Hard rock.
Yes, being drowned out in many senses, drowned out by the noise and drowned out by the influence. But do remember to keep that up and adapt it to modern world. And of course, these things are never fossilized. They grow over the years. So, but you need to be aware of the past and not just think of how to adapt to the present.
And you also talked at the end of the conference here about the children, how important the music is for the children to learn the language.
Yes. No, music is a very good way of teaching at all ages, because it's enjoyable, and it'd be a very good way of getting the next generation of very young children singing songs in either Toroyo, Zurat, or even Ktopanoyo, it doesn't matter which, and getting them interested. And there are many ways of stimulating young children who haven't yet been, as it were, spoiled by some of the developments in the modern world. They haven't been sort of addicted to modern technology, television, and so on. So.
تودي ساقي مالفونو سيباستيان بو عنان لو حلمون وطوبو. We wish you a long life and healthy life as you to keep your healthy style and go into teaching and working. Thank you.
تودي لخون.
تودي ساقي. Ja, فرجانا مقرأ ثيم قبل نثيذا وعمل فونو سيباستيان بروك لو موضة تسيم ديلونو يثلوي قوريذي هركي بيدو كثبا سمتاثي بسيكتونا لارور مستوكولم آثن مبريثو كل ملفوني وناهيري وقاروي دن يقري وفي الحنيذات حمشيش نكتلي بتعبو بهوغو سريوي بمعبرونوثو بترجمة بتعبو دهاويلي لشنت فورس إمردوثو سريوتو ببريثو والهل تحرز تحرتو كمنا نخو فشو بشلومو يوم باسيم